Jack moved silently through the dimly lit halls of Willow Creek Elementary, the soft squeak of his mop the only sound echoing through the empty building. The night shift wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, enough to pay rent, cover meals, and keep the lights on at home. More importantly, it gave him time during the day to be with his daughter, Emily. At just 7 years old, she was his whole world. Every sweep of his mop and every polished floor was for her smile. What the school staff and students saw was just the janitor, uniformed, quiet, with tired eyes and rough hands. But there was more to Jack than anyone noticed. Tucked inside his janitor's cart, along with rags and spray bottles, he carried a few treasures: a worn-out notebook filled with bedtime stories he made up for Emily, a photo of her taped inside his locker, and a tiny bottle of bubble soap, bright yellow with a cracked cap. That bubble bottle had saved more than one bad day. It was his secret trick, not just for Emily, but for any moment that needed a touch of lightness. It reminded him of simpler times, when Emily was a toddler and Bubbles could fix a scraped knee or a sad afternoon. He didn't mind the quiet. In fact, he liked it. The empty halls gave him space to think, to plan, to breathe. At night, with the world asleep and his daughter safe in the care of his neighbor, Jack let the rhythm of routine carry him through. But beneath that routine was a man who'd faced heartbreak and hard times, who had learned to make peace with loss and still find reasons to smile. His wife had passed away when Emily was just a baby. Since then, Jack had been doing his best, failing, stumbling, but always trying. No one knew how many times he skipped dinner so Emily could have a full plate. Or how many nights he read her the same story 3 times in a row, even when he was falling asleep mid-sentence. To the world, he was just the janitor. But to Emily, he was everything. And tonight, as always, Jack worked quietly, unaware that this shift would lead to a moment that would change not just his life, but the life of someone watching from the shadows. It was late, the kind of late where even the clock seemed to tick slower. Jack was heading toward the back stairwell to finish mopping when he heard it, a quiet, broken sob floating through the still air. He paused. Most nights were silent, but this sound cut through everything. He followed it, heart picking up speed with every step. At the base of the stairwell, in the dim glow of a flickering hallway light, he saw her. A little girl, curled up like a question mark against the cold cement wall. Her school uniform was wrinkled, her backpack tossed aside, and her tiny hands were clenched so tightly they trembled. Tears had left shining trails down her flushed cheeks. She looked utterly lost. Jack crouched a few feet away, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly, voice like a whisper in the dark. "You okay?" She didn't answer, just glanced up with red-rimmed eyes that held a fear far too heavy for someone her age. It wasn't the kind of sadness from a scraped knee or a fight with a friend. This was deeper. It was the look of a child carrying something far too big alone. No teachers were around. No parents rushing in with open arms. Just this little girl, sitting in silence like the world had forgotten her. Jack's chest tightened. He didn't know her story, didn't know what pain had brought her to this corner, but he recognized that look. He had seen it before, in his own daughter's eyes, the first night she cried for her mother. He didn't push or question. Instead, he gently sat on the floor near her, saying nothing. Just his presence, quiet and patient. Sometimes, Jack knew, the greatest kindness was simply being there. He waited, letting the silence stretch, letting her know she wasn't invisible. There was no manual for moments like this. No training. Just instinct, and a father's heart. The hallway remained hushed, the world outside unaware of the quiet storm taking place in that stairwell. But for Jack, this was no ordinary night. Something told him that this girl wasn't just lost in the moment, she was waiting for someone to care enough to notice. Jack didn't say a word. He could feel the heaviness hanging in the air like fog, too thick for words to cut through. Instead, he slowly reached into his janitor's cart and pulled out the little yellow bottle of bubble soap. Its label was faded, the cap chipped, but it still worked. It always did. Without explanation, he dipped the tiny wand, brought it to his lips, and blew gently. A soft stream of shimmering bubbles drifted into the stairwell, catching the dim light as they floated through the air. They danced and twirled in slow motion, each one fragile and perfect. The little girl's eyes followed them, wide and unsure. Like someone remembering a dream they thought they'd lost. Another bubble popped just above her head. Then another landed on her knee and vanished with a soft pop. Slowly, her breathing calmed. The trembling in her hands faded. And then, just barely, her lips turned upward. "My daddy used to do that," she whispered, almost like she didn't mean to say it out loud. Jack didn't ask where her father was, or why she was crying, or what had happened. He didn't need to. Some pain didn't need a story, it just needed a little light. He simply nodded, dipping the wand again and sending another trail of bubbles skyward. They floated between them like tiny stars, filling the cold stairwell with something warm and gentle. The girl reached out slowly, popping one with her finger. Then another. Her shoulders softened. Her eyes weren't as glassy now. For the first time in what must have been a very long day, she looked like a child again. Jack kept blowing bubbles, quietly, steadily. His face calm, his presence steady. No lectures. No rules. Just a silent promise, you're not alone. For a few sacred minutes, the world outside disappeared. There was no brokenness, no fear, only bubbles in the dark, and a janitor who knew that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness speak the loudest. Just around the corner, hidden by the edge of the hallway, stood a woman frozen in place. Her designer heels made no sound against the polished tile. In one hand, she held her phone, screen still lit with unanswered messages. But she wasn't looking at it anymore. Her eyes were locked on the scene unfolding just beyond the stairwell, on her daughter, and the man beside her. Alyssa Monroe, powerhouse CEO, billionaire, and single mother, had arrived in a rush after a last-minute call from the school. Her meetings had run long, her driver had hit traffic, and for the first time in weeks, she'd realized how distant she'd become. She was used to solving things quickly. Throwing money at the problem until it disappeared. But as she stood there watching her daughter, curled against a school janitor, silently entranced by a stream of floating bubbles, Alyssa felt her heart crack open. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. She hadn't seen her daughter smile like that in months. Not with the tutors, not with the therapists, not even at home where the rooms were filled with everything except warmth. And now, here she was, being gently brought back to life by a stranger with worn shoes, kind eyes, and a bottle of soap. Alyssa didn't move. She didn't interrupt. For once, she understood that this moment didn't need her. It needed stillness. Respect. Gratitude. She studied the man. The way he stayed quiet. The way he didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix anything. Just sat there, blowing bubbles like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like helping someone wasn't something to announce, but something you just did. In her world, value was measured in numbers. Profit. Growth. Leverage. But here was something she couldn't measure, couldn't buy. The raw, human magic of compassion from someone who had nothing to gain. She took a breath, deep and shaky. For the first time in a long time, she saw clearly, not just her daughter, but herself. And she knew, in that quiet moment, that she owed everything not to a policy, a check, or a plan, but to the janitor who had simply chosen to care. The sun poured gently over the school courtyard, warming the freshly cut grass and bouncing off the laughter of children playing nearby. Jack stood near a bench, dressed not in his janitor's uniform today, but in a simple button-down shirt Alyssa had insisted he wear for the occasion. Beside him stood Alyssa Monroe, no boardroom, no assistants, just a mother, holding a paper cup of coffee with hands that seemed softer now. She had returned a few days after that night in the stairwell, not with a checkbook or a media team, but with a quiet sincerity that surprised even her. She didn't speak in business terms. She didn't pitch an idea. She simply thanked Jack, for seeing her daughter, for helping her when no one else had, and for doing it not out of duty, but out of humanity. And then she offered him something more. Alyssa wanted to start a school program, one that focused on emotional safety, mentorship, and human connection. She asked Jack to help lead it. Not as a janitor, but as someone who understood what it meant to show up for people, to listen, and to simply be there. It wasn't about qualifications or titles. It was about heart. Jack was stunned. Humbled. But as he looked across the yard and saw his daughter Emily playing tag with Alyssa's little girl, two children from different worlds now laughing like lifelong friends, he felt a quiet joy rise in his chest. He hadn't blown those bubbles to impress anyone. He hadn't planned to change anyone's life. He just saw a child in pain and did what he hoped someone would do for his own daughter. Now, that small act had rippled outward. As the two girls burst into laughter again, Jack smiled, deeply, genuinely. Not for the new title or the paycheck, but for the moment. For the reminder that kindness doesn't need an audience, and that sometimes, the smallest, simplest gestures, like a floating bubble in a dark stairwell, can become the spark that lights up someone's entire world.